one of you wants to go first? I want to hear about the early days. I want to hear about the counseling. I came to writing, I think, by accident. I didn't know what I wanted to major in college. I didn't even want to go. And my mother told me to major in home ec. And she didn't really realize I can't cook or sew, but back then, home ec would be an easy major. So I majored in home ec, and I began teaching 7th grade home ec. After a year of that, I decided it was the hardest thing in the world to do. And so I went back to school and got a degree in marriage and family counseling because I really wanted to be a counselor. And after a few months of counseling, that made teaching look really good. I mean, couples were coming to me, and after 15 minutes of listening to them, I was saying, I couldn't live with either one of them. So at 35, with 2 small children, and the idea that eventually I would have to send them to college, I got the idea that I wanted to write a book. And as I worked through it, I never seemed to have the time. I worked harder and harder, and I never seemed to have the time. And one night, my husband said to me, "You go write. I'll get the children to bed. I'll do the dishes." And that's been our pattern for 30 years. What's funny about that is we raise 2 sons now who think doing the dishes is man's work. And so I started working. We were both teaching school at the time, and we heard about a national conference we could go to. And it was RWA, and I knew it'd never be closer to me than Dallas, and it took a month's salary of teaching to be able to afford the 3 days to go to the conference. I went to the conference and met an editor and told her all about my book, and she said, "How fast can you get it to me?" And I said, "Tomorrow's mail," and I don't think I went to sleep before it was in the mail. About 3 months later, she called while I was getting ready to start teaching one morning, and she said, "Is this Jodi Thomas?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Author of Western Bread?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I want to buy your book." I started screaming and running up and down the halls and yelling, and then I realized she was probably still on the phone. And I went back, and she said, "Before we go any further, I want you to know we have a problem with the name." And I said, "My name or the book's name?" And she said, "We're buying the book. We're going to name it whatever we want to," which they did, believe me. And she said, "But we have a problem with culottes. It won't fit on the cover." Now, I had a problem with that because I like the name culottes. I married it. And we were raising little culottes. And we liked it. And she gave me 24 hours to pick a pen name. So, since I'm married to Thomas Kumalats, I became Jodi Thomas. Now I think it's really funny, when we go to New York, they all call him Mr. Thomas. And he says, they must think my parents had no imagination. That's how my career got started. It was all because Thomas agreed to do the dishes. Married people who were arguing. That was another thing. Debbie.
I'm going to start off when I was 4 years old.
Okay.
My mother took me to the library for the very first time, and it was an old Andrew Carnegie library with a stone structure that looked like a castle. And there were children's books as readily available then as they are now. And Mom said that when the librarian handed me that book, I grabbed hold of it with both hands and put it right next to my heart. And that librarian was Beverly Cleary. Oh. So I have a very special place in my heart for libraries. I've always wanted to be a writer. From that moment I was 4 years old and held that first book, that's all I ever wanted to do, was be a writer. But I'm dyslexic, and I didn't have a word for it when I was growing up. The third grade teacher told my mom, Debbie's a nice little girl, but she will never do well in school. And I didn't. I barely graduated from high school. I married as a teenager, and Wayne and I had 4 children right away. But that dream just throbbed in me. I was doing a readers group earlier in the day, and I was trying to explain to them what it felt when you burn yourself or cut yourself. It will throb with pain. But every time I thought about being a writer, I throbbed with joy, just that anticipation. But it took actually a really bad thing. A cousin that I had grown up with that I was very close to died of leukemia. And it was as if God was saying to me, you cannot stuff your dreams into the future. So this is back in 1978. Rented a typewriter, put it on the kitchen table. I can actually remember bouncing my son on my hip as I pounded away with one key, and he was dressed. The upstairs was not that good. I remember one time my mother was coming Jodi was our oldest, was watching TV, and I brought the vacuum cleaner upstairs, and Jodi said to me, Grandma coming? She was 5. So that's how I got started, and it took 5 years to sell the first book, and I wasn't just politely tapping at the door of opportunity. I was putting the full force of my German determination behind it. 5 years and 4 manuscripts. How long, Jodi? About 5 years, not 5 years. I'm precocious. It only took me 3.5. Some of us have suffered more than others. So now, what is the high point of your career so far? Jodi, you have some new news.
Yes, I spoke to the writers of Great Britain this summer, so I was in the States, and I was actually flying back from England when my editor was flying from New York to Washington, D.C., because I was a finalist up for both the National Reader's Choice Award for both historical and for women's fiction. And I said to my editor, I hate to make this trip, and she said, that's okay, get out of the office. And I said, call me, I'll be home about midnight. And when I got home, there was no call, so I knew I hadn't won. And the next day, I was awake all day thinking, I suffered 2 of them. I thought I'd win 1 of them. And the next day, I plugged in my cell phone, which I hadn't used in a month, and it was her screaming and yelling that I won both the National Reader's Choice. The highlight of my life in writing definitely is one in 2006 when I won my 3rd Rita for the best historical romance written nationwide for the RWA. And I went up on stage and I had my speech planned and I gave my speech, and when I turned around they stopped me and they moved me off to the side and they said, you can't leave the stage. And Nora Roberts and Nora Roberts came up and she said, on the rare occasion we have a writer win 3 Ritas in the same category, she is immediately inducted into the Hall of Fame.